If you've just landed on this planet, Betty Broderick is famous for shooting to death her ex-husband and his new bride in their sleep. When I get to that part, I may lose some audience because that's the most boring part of the story. Dan and Betty were raised by upper-middle-class parents who owned their own businesses. Betty's father was a building contractor. Dan's father was a lumber wholesaler. To keep up the elite station in life, they were both college-bound, aiming to be professionals. Dan in medicine and Betty in early childhood development. Dan hailed from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Betty was from East Chester, New York. The pair met in 1965 in Indiana during a Notre Dame football weekend at a senior class party where Jerry Lee Lewis was playing live. Dan asked to borrow a pen from Betty, and that got things rolling. With Betty within earshot, he said to a friend, "See that girl over there? That's the girl I'm going to marry." He had just finished pre-med college and was accepted at Cornell University in New York. Dan kept in touch with Betty through letter writing over the summer. When he relocated in New York to start med school, they were able to date. Their courtship would last 3 years. Dan's father supported him through medical school. He paid the tuition, his dorm accommodations, food, and whatever else he needed. But at some point, Dan had changed his mind. He wanted to become a lawyer, specializing in malpractice. It was an up-and-coming field. He would be getting in on the ground floor. There would be far more money in it than medicine. When he approached his father about a second degree, his father said he would only finance 1 degree per child. Dan was the eldest of 9 children. He was on his own for a law degree. But Dan was a man with a plan. Betty said on their first date, electricity passed through her upon being with Dan. Since Dan was a struggling med student, Betty paid for the dates. She had disposable income from a part-time job and owned a car.
But she continued to work enough that she bought her own car, their only transportation in New York. She would pay for dates. She would pay for them to be able to go out.
Betty said Dan was infatuated with her. She claimed he was pestering her about marriage from day one. She wanted to wait until she finished her college education, but he encouraged her to marry him and attend college simultaneously. He also tried to get her to elope with him.
Was there any discussions of marriage during the time that you were dating?
Yes, a lot.
What were the discussions that you had with Mr. Broderick about being married, about getting married?
As soon as I started going out with him, he wanted to get married.
Okay. And was that something that both of you talked about?
Yes, we talked about it a lot.
And what did you tell him?
I told him that, I wasn't even thinking about marriage. I had to get my college degree, and at that point I was only starting my 2nd year of college. And he said that I could do both, that I could marry him and finish my college degree, but I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do it one at a time because I thought each thing was rather a full-time job.
Did your mother ever tell you why she married your dad?
No. I know she said she didn't want to. He just kept bugging her.
Did she say anything about pitying him?
She felt sorry for him that he asked her so many times, so then she finally gave in.
Dan's take on this, Dan denied he was so enthralled. He was interested in her enough to pursue her. Betty worked, Dan didn't. She made $17,000 in a year on a part-time modeling gig while in college, whereas Dan only had tuition and school money. They used her car to drive around. Betty comes up Leo rising. Throughout her trial, she often had a bemused expression on her face with a sort of twinkle in her eye, almost as if she didn't take the trial very seriously. Many people said she was a lot of laughs. Note Neptune in the 3rd. There was a pattern in her life of believing what she wanted to believe instead of accepting reality. Because she accumulated enough credits, Betty was able to graduate 6 months early, so by December 1968, she received her degree. She was able to get a third-grade teaching job, and they married in April 1969 during spring break. Betty's mother was shocked that Dan didn't even rent a tux. He used a business suit to get married in. He wore a flowered tie he bought for 99 cents, as well as selecting wingtip shoes that didn't seem appropriate for a wedding. Dan comes up Sagittarius rising. Notice his ruler in Virgo. He was a workaholic. Betty had an unromantic honeymoon. Dan's nose, as usual, was buried in books. According to Brian Monahan, only 2 weeks after the wedding, Dan was crying on a bus in New York City, aware he had made a terrible and tragic mistake. He was looking out a window and wanting to cry because he knew he had done the wrong thing. But he was Catholic and he was stuck. I swear to God, I couldn't believe it. I was 24 years old. She was upset with me. She would never tell me why. She would say, "If you don't know what I'm upset about, then you've got a real problem. I don't want to talk about it. I want to be divorced." I heard later that he phoned his brother Larry to bemoan that he had made the worst mistake of his life. After the wedding, they settled into married life. Betty complained that Dan never courted her, never wanted to spend time with her. But Dan didn't want to waste money on recreation. He didn't want to waste the precious time he could be studying, and he didn't want to pretend to be romantic with someone he didn't love. Dan had commandeered her paycheck as soon as they were married. From that point on, Dan handled all financial matters and kept Betty clueless on what savings they had and what he did with the money. But after they married, her car was stolen. They couldn't get indemnified by the insurance company because Dan had canceled the policy and spent the refund on Barney's department store. Dan was a flamboyant dresser, and even in hard times, he had money for clothes. After their honeymoon, Betty was feeling ill. When she described her symptoms to Dan, he told her she was pregnant. She couldn't understand why he insisted on not using birth control when they were ill-equipped to raise a family. At that time, married men, especially with children, would not be drafted. Med school provided a draft deferment only until he became an intern, which he reached upon graduation. According to Betty, Dan never really wanted to become a doctor. He didn't like to witness pain and suffering, and he didn't like to touch people. He just wanted the money that came with the field. The Vietnam War was raging, but he received a draft notice anyway. Dan panicked and had doctor friends write letters to the draft board saying he had bleeding ulcers and was on medication for them. It worked. He dodged the draft. When his friends at the pub would talk about their military experiences, Dan was subdued. It was a sensitive subject with him. After the baby was born, Betty had to quit her teacher's job to watch over Kim. She found a job babysitting the infant of married college students while they attended school. Dan was 2 months away from graduating med school. He would then be a paid intern. But it was then he asked Betty if she would be willing to support him through 4 more years to go to law school. He told her the money would be greater than if he became a doctor. She agreed. Betty worked at menial jobs at meager pay to support Dan through his schooling. She had to haul dirty diapers and laundry in the freezing snow on a bus while Dan was at student activities or studying at home. She had to work assorted jobs, such as selling Tupperware and Avon and babysitting, taking Kim and now Lee with her to keep the 4 of them afloat. She could have had a nice teaching job, but she was burdened with watching the kids. She would later hold multiple jobs, waitress, restaurant hostess, having her own little daycare business, with Dan watching over the kids after school while she went on one of her night jobs. In the meantime, Dan would be involved in school and extracurricular activities such as ski trips and having flying lessons to make all the right connections that could be useful in the future. Somehow Dan was always well dressed, even when they were poor. While everyone else in the 60s was wearing jeans, he was suited in tailored clothes, including custom-made lab jackets. They called him Dapper Dan. In the meantime, they had to supplement their income with food stamps. They'd go from one cheap, cramped apartment to the next, some in bad neighborhoods. After this got old, Betty accused Dan of marrying her while he was in med school just so he could spring it on her 2 months before graduation that he wanted to become a lawyer instead.
And this was in Dan's last year of medical school.
Correct.
Okay. Were there any decisions made about the future of the family or what was going to happen after he finished medical school?
Yes, in the 4th year of medical school, you take a series of electives where you decide what area of medicine, from psychiatry to dermatology, what surgery, and you pick electives so that you can choose what area of medicine you might like to go into. One of Dan's electives that he chose was to get on a suit and tie and go downtown to a New York law firm every day and research becoming involved in the medical malpractice field as a lawyer doctor. That was one of the things he researched in 4th year, and he did decide to do that.
Okay, he decided to do what? Go on to law
To
school?
become involved in the emerging, it was just starting, medical malpractice field as an attorney that would have a great knowledge of medicine as well by being a doctor and a lawyer.
Now, was that a decision that you were willing to live with, him going to law school rather than going out and practice as a doctor?
Yes, that was fine with me, whatever he wanted to do,
And why was that?
because that's a wife's job, whatever the husband wants to do, it was my job to support him emotionally and, psychologically, and great, let's do it. So we did it.
And was there, did you discuss or did you come to understand how his legal education would be financed?
That was a problem because we didn't have any income except mine, which was pathetic. And so we needed to finance the next 3 years totally on loans.
And was there any discussion about night school or some other way of getting through law school?
Yes, he wanted to be a doctor and a lawyer, and the options open were to do law school part-time days, part-time nights, or full-time days. And if he had done one of the part-time things, he could have worked as well, which is how a lot of people get through law school. But he chose to go full-time at Harvard.
Okay. Was that something that you were in disagreement about?
No. Harvard didn't have a part-time program, but it was very, very expensive.
So Dan's decision to become a malpractice attorney did not happen 2 months before he graduated med school. It was really way back at the beginning of his senior year at a minimum, because that's when he settled on a senior year elective for malpractice, and that decision could have been made even earlier. Betty had an underlying anger toward Dan because he wasn't acting like someone who loved her. He gave her a life of misery and toil. Whenever she was angry at Dan, she rolled out the D word, divorce, because she knew that would get his attention. He would immediately apologize and go about setting things right. She used this technique liberally, although she knew she would never really go through with it.
Why is it that you say now that you don't think your parents ever had a happy marriage?
Because as far as I can remember back, they were fighting and saying they were going to get divorced.
You indicated saying they were going to get divorced. Who was it that would say to you they were going to get divorced?
My mom.
And what would she say?
She would say, your father and I are going to get a divorce. Who do you want to live with?
Can I check the microphone and then?
Certainly.
Microphone.
It's turned all the way up.
When you indicate that your mom would say something like that, like, your father and I are going to get a divorce, who do you want to live with? About how old were you when she would say something like that?
Yeah, before I was 10, like 7 or 8. No, yeah, about 7 or 8, and then from then on.
And was that something that she just said once, or was it something that she said?
No, repeatedly.
Whenever Betty was frustrated with her lot in life, Dan would remind her to keep her eye on the prize. When he finally makes it, they'll be living the life and will be glad they waited for the delayed reward.
He apologized for not spending time with us and said what he needed in life were to reach these financial goals that he had set for himself way, way back. And only when he reached those financial goals would he then have time to be a nice person to me and the kids and to give us time. But I had to give him more time and stick with him until he reached those financial goals. And when he got there, then it was all going to be rosy and it was all going to pay off and it was all going to be wonderful. But I had to be patient because he had to do that first.
In their marriage, Betty had the upper hand because she supported him. That enabled her to fling things at him, call him insulting names in front of company, and never have to worry about his walking out. Her angry, domineering bossiness, coupled with his cowering responses, fostered an unrestrained bully. Having to be a workhorse for a man who showed her no love, she was free to unleash herself in frustration, hurling objects at will. He wasn't going anywhere. As long as she had the power, he had to bow down and suffer every humiliation that came with it.
Yes, did your mother ever do anything violent towards your father?
I never saw her hit him, but she would scratch him and stick her fingernails in his arm. But I didn't see her hit him.
Was that when she would, you indicated sticking her fingernails in his arm. Was that something that happened just on occasion, or did it happen often?
It happened pretty often when we were young. And I know that she scratched his back once. I saw that, that's all.
Were there ever any incidents where she threw anything at him?
Yes.
Can you describe?
One night at dinner, he came in late, and, well, I don't know if that was the whole issue, but she threw a ketchup bottle at him across the table. And then one time, we went to dinner, and we got back, and, well, we went out for pizza, and we got back, and she threw a stereo, and then she threw this thing, this marble thing that has little, I think you grind something in it or something. She threw that. And that's pretty much all she threw.
The incident where she threw the ketchup bottle, how do you recall how he responded to that? Did he throw anything back at her, or was there a fight?
No, it just smashed on the wall. And that was about all for that.
And the time that you went out for pizza with your dad, who else was at this pizza?
Dave Monahan and his children.
Okay, can you tell us who David Monahan is?
He's a friend of my father's.
So your dad, you and your
Sister.
and David Monahan and his children, you all went out for pizza together.
Right.
And then what happened when you got home?
We were late, and then she threw a stereo. When we walked in the door, she threw the stereo, and then she threw the marble thing.
Do you recall?
No, that's wrong. The stereo was already thrown. It was like right when we walked in, the stereo was already thrown, and then she threw the marble thing when we were in there. So the stereo was already on the ground when I walked in the house.
Was she throwing it at your dad?
Well, he walked in first, and then the stereo was thrown, and then I walked in, the stereo was on the ground. She didn't hit him.
How about with the marble thing?
It didn't hit him. I mean, she threw it at him, though.
Do you recall what his reaction was?
No, he didn't really have a reaction. Just, they all sent us up to bed and, so, oh geez.
Was it clear that your mother was angry at the time?
Yeah. Well, we didn't know that before we got home. But once we got home, it was pretty obvious that she was angry.
So this was something that once he opened the door, it was obvious that she was angry when she threw this.
Right. Very angry.
How about, were there ever situations when your mother locked your father out of the house?
Yes.
Can you describe that?
That usually happened if Dad would go out after work, and then Mom would lock the door. And then he would either, they had a balcony outside their bedroom, so he would either go up there and somehow get in, or one time I think he knocked the door down. And then another time he slept in the garage.
So this was something that happened on more than one occasion?
Yeah, it happened quite a few times.
Would he ever call up to you to have you let him in the house?
Yes.
Do you remember ever a time when your mother actually kicked him out of the house for an extended period of time?
Yes, he moved out into a hotel in La Jolla for a while. Not more than a month, I think like a week or so.
Was this, do you recall, was this when he was still working for the firm of Gray Carey?
Yes.
And do you recall what his reaction was when your mother told him to leave?
He didn't want to go.
What did he say?
He said he'd be back soon and it'll be okay. And no, he didn't want to go at all.
Were you allowed to see him or talk to him when he left?
I don't really remember how long he was gone, but I know we didn't see him a lot. But he wasn't gone that long. He was only gone like a week or two.
Did he say anything to your mom about, please don't make me go?
Yes, and then Mom was playing the song "You Don't Bring Me Flowers" on the radio. She was playing the record, and then everyone was crying. He just said he'd be back soon. When they were talking in front of us, he was mostly just talking to us. He wasn't talking to Mom anymore. He was telling us goodbye.
And that he'd be back soon.
Right.
They practiced no birth control because Dan wasn't having it. Betty got pregnant 9 times in 10 years. She had 5 live births, one dying 4 days after he was born, 2 abortions, and 2 miscarriages. She had a tubal ligation on the last birth, preventing further pregnancy. Dan's first entry legal job at Gray Carey paid him $19,000 a year. He billed 3 times as many hours as any other lawyer at the firm. By 1978, he was making around $32,500. He was ripe for being made partner, but he didn't want to be seduced into it because he believed you didn't make money working for someone else. Betty encouraged Dan to take the gamble to leave his employer.
I wanted him to leave Gray Carey because of all the drinking and all the craziness that was going on. I hated it. And he wanted to leave Gray Carey because he had his medical background, and he was supposed to be doing medical malpractice. Gray Carey had no medical malpractice clients or cases at all, and they would not allow him to start a personal injury business within the firm. So he was not doing professionally what he wanted to do either. So he wanted to leave for professional reasons, and I wanted him to leave for family reasons.
Dan was 34 years old. Since he was 18, he was preparing to make it in the world. Now, when they finally had a steady, reliable paycheck and life was a little more comfortable, although they still had looming debt, they were discussing starting all over again. What if the business failed? They would be perpetually starting all over. The Brodericks went to a marriage encounter event designed to strengthen their marriage, hosted by the church. In an essay assignment he was given, Dan wrote, "I may not make it before it's too late. I feel lately that time is running out on me." He recalled how he used to joke around in school that the worst thing that could happen to me in the world would be for me to finish medical school, finish law school, pass the bar, and then be killed. If I were told that I had a short time left to live, I'd feel that I had wasted my whole life. Everything I've done so far has been in preparation for the good life I aspire to. They would take out a $500,000 loan for him to go into his own practice and to live on until his business made it. In order for Dan to scrounge up business, he began teaching continuing education classes through the Bar Association to other lawyers. He did this as a favor to the judges. He got on the Bar Association committee that selected and endorsed certain judges for re-election. The judges loved Dan, and he did as many favors for them as he could. One judge's mother tripped and fell on a sidewalk. Dan sued the city and got her a big settlement, and then he refused his fee, knowing he would be amply rewarded in other ways. It's a you do for me and I'll do for you in a quid pro quo world. For 13 years, Betty was entrenched in solid toil. When Dan's business finally took off in 1982, he gave her one solid year of living the dream, rubbing elbows with high society, spending thousands of dollars on gowns, designer labels, Bob Mackie, Oscar de la Renta, Neiman Marcus, swanky dress shops, attending the prestigious annual Bar Association Blackstone Ball, vacation travel, carte blanche spending sprees, country clubs, partying it up at high-caliber social functions, charity luncheons, pictured in the society pages, traveling through Europe, cruises to the Caribbean islands, ski trips. She was enviously ensconced under the arm of the best-looking, most highly respected man in the ballroom, later to become the president of the San Diego Bar Association, Dan Broderick. When Dan won $1 million settlement, they celebrated by going to a restaurant and decided to do that every time he attained that goal. But when they were at that restaurant 3 times in a week, they figured they'd raise the bar to $10 million. Dan went about calling himself Count du Monet.
Did you stay in different kind of places than the first time you went?
Yes, as I said, the progression from 81 to 83 was absolutely phenomenal. By the time we went in 1983, we stayed in the most expensive hotels in the world, and Dan was calling himself the Count de Monet for the Count the money.
She had arrived. It was worth the wait. Working herself to the bone all those years, it was all worth it, every miserable minute of it. Never having to work again, having unlimited money to spend for the rest of her life. But it wouldn't be long before Dan pulled the rug out from under. Betty still had the abrasive personality. Old habits die hard. But unbeknownst to her, she no longer had the power. He didn't need her to support the family anymore. Dan had taken over as provider. He would simply bide his time until he was ready to roll out Linda Coquina. This would be Betty's first heads up that he was leaving her. By now, Dan had been psychologically beaten down by Betty much too often. He likely harbored resentments and vengefulness of his own, built up over years of her bullying. She no longer had any real power over him, except for a divorce settlement. In January of 1983, at a cocktail party, Betty overheard Dan telling a colleague, "Isn't she beautiful?" Now, do you really think Dan would say something like that, knowing Betty was within earshot, unless he wanted her to hear that? A handy little trick of Dan's, just like when he first met Betty and said within earshot, "That's the girl I'm going to marry." Betty asked as casually as she could, who was that woman he was referring to? He looked at her blankly, as if uncomprehending. "That's Linda Coquina. Just some new girl at the office, a receptionist. Betty looked at her critically. I was shocked that this was the girl he thought was so beautiful. She was just another skinny little bimbo with a gap between her front teeth. She had all this hair, all poofed up like Bridget Bardot, bobby pins and the whole bit, not a streak of blonde in it. I was, to say the least, underwhelmed. It never occurred to her to speak to Linda Coquina. Why should I lower myself? She was obviously just another 19-year-old airhead looking for a rich husband. She couldn't hold a candle to me. I was prettier, I was smarter, I was classier. It never occurred to me that Dan would be stupid enough to throw his family away for his office girl. It was just too much of a cliche to believe.
But in 1983, I noticed Dan at a party talking about some girl that he thought was really beautiful. And that was my first clue that Linda Coquina existed.
Okay, and Linda Coquina was the assistant that he'd hired for himself. Is that true?
She was the receptionist in the law building where he worked, and then he subsequently, after becoming involved with her, hired her in September '83.
Did you ask him if he was having an affair?
Yes.
And he said?
Totally denied it and said I was imagining things and I was crazy, and that Linda was a sweet, innocent young girl, and there was absolutely nothing going on. Never was. And oh, and by the way, your fat, old, boring, ugly, and stupid just started coming on the scene then. He was unhappy with everything in his life.
He told you that you were fat and old and boring and stupid? He said
yes,
those words
and he
to you?
didn't like our home, and he didn't like our children, and it was, to me, it was an absolute classic midlife crisis. And I devoured every book on the subject.
To the point of even he got the red Corvette, is that true?
Got the red Corvette, the risky business sunglasses, the scarf around his neck, the leather jacket. I told him he was the American joke. If only he would go to a therapist of some sort.
Linda Coquina was a lobby receptionist where Dan worked. She couldn't type. She had been fired from Delta Airlines for drunkenly sitting on a passenger's lap in the back of the plane and making out with him. She was not on duty. She was taking a trip with her friends. She was told to stop it by the stewardess, and as soon as the stewardess turned her back, there was Coquina back on the guy's lap smooching. Delta fired her. During the rest of the year, Dan sometimes acted moody, short with his family. Betty ignored it and planned on the 5-week vacation she would be taking with the kids as soon as the school semester ended. Dan was working and couldn't join them, but he scheduled 2 weekend trips to visit them. On the first visit, he seemed grumpy, distant. On the second visit, he appeared downright hostile. He criticized everything she did and seemed annoyed by her. When Betty returned from the trip late at night, he didn't say a word to her. The next day, while driving to a wedding, Dan told her she was fat, old, boring, ugly, and stupid. After the shock, Betty said, "I'm 35 years old and I wear a size 8, so I can't be very fat for someone 5'11". Everyone always says I'm pretty, and I know I'm not stupid. I'm sick of you. I'm sick of the kids. I'm sick of the house. I want to throw in the towel." Betty was thinking, what have you been doing while I've been pitching tents with your 4 kids? But she didn't say anything. She hoped if she ignored it, it would all go away. One day he came home drunk. "I've hired an assistant." "Oh, that's great. You'll have more time to spend with me and the kids. I know you've always been a one-man band, but you really needed a secretary. Who is it?" "Linda, the receptionist." "You don't mean the Linda. She can't even type." After some discussion, she yelled, "Get rid of her. I'll give you 3 weeks. I want her out of there by October 1st, or you're out of this house." "Lady, you're crazy. You're losing it. It's my house. If you don't like things my way, you can get out." More than anything, Betty wanted Dan back. She practically stopped eating. She grew her hair long like it was in college. She called a cosmetic surgeon to get rid of wrinkles that were hardly there. She got braces to fix her one crooked tooth and considered a brow lift and a tummy tuck. A few years back, she got braces to fix her overbite. I liked my overbite. If you look closely, a lot of models have one. But it changed the entire shape of her face. I never looked like me after that. She wanted to be 19 again and look absolutely perfect for Dan. She believed he was going through a midlife crisis. He became colder, more distant, and more abusive.
Now, during this period, was Betty taking any steps to change herself to please Mr. Broderick?
Yes, she was constantly telling me that he was critical of her. Specifically, one week she'd say, he thinks I'm too heavy, so she says I'm on a new diet. Then she would say, soon after that, oh, he thinks my skin is broken out too much, I'm going to a dermatologist. She would then say, he doesn't like the way I dress, so she would go out and buy some new clothes. She was constantly, every week it seemed to be, it was something else that he seemed to be critical of.
Dan came home late every night that week. Betty got a call from a friend. I missed you last night at the black tie opening party. I sent the invitation to both of you, but Dan showed up with this gorgeous girl, said she was his personal assistant, and you were busy. They came and left together. You better watch out. Dan had taken a trip to Oregon. When he came home, he was all smiles. What's the matter with you? She told him about the call. Give me a break. Linda was just going to the same party. I can't control where she goes. She volunteered to drive me to the airport, so we left together. Man, you're really losing it. Your wheels are coming off. In the autumn, Dan's parents visited them. His mother wanted to see her son in lawyer action, so she and Betty went to court one day. It was the first time Betty ever watched her husband do his money-making thing, when who does she suddenly spot sitting across the room but Linda Cocaina, who was also watching Dan, all wide-eyed and admiring. On Betty's 36th birthday, Dan didn't come home or call her. Betty celebrated with the children. After the kids went to bed, Betty took out some old pills in the medicine cabinet, perhaps Seconal or Prozac. She poured them in her hand and swallowed them one at a time with water. She went into the guest bedroom and lied down. In a dreamlike state, she got up and walked unsteadily to the bathroom. She took Dan's razor and started cutting her wrists. A dizziness overtook her as she was bleeding, and she walked, wrists up, for the bed. The prosecuting attorney was later to claim they were superficial cuts. Betty showed the jury the scars on her wrist, apologizing to them that the wounds were so faint that the defense had to call a cosmetic surgeon to testify they were actually there. Dan shook her. Holy shit, Bets! What the hell have you done? The room was light. The bed was full of dried blood. I'm sorry. I wish you hadn't done that. What the hell would the kids do without you? His head was on her shoulders. He must still love her. After all, he was crying. I love you, darling. Don't cry, she whispered. Bets, you're very sick. You've been imagining things about me and Linda. She's just a sweet, innocent girl. I hired her because she got fired from her other job answering the phones, and I felt sorry for her. She's very intelligent and a great help to me, but there's nothing going on. You really need help. You're having a breakdown. Come, let's wash this off and get it bandaged. Dan used his medical training to bandage her wrists. She promised Dan she'd call a therapist that afternoon and arrange to get some help.
Did you ever feel that you were imagining things because of what Dan told you? And were there times where you felt that you were crazy or imagining things?
There were times when I doubted. I had feelings and impressions of what I thought was true, and he was telling me that that was not true, and so I felt imbalanced because what I felt and saw and suspected and all the clues were pointing one way, and he's telling me, you know, black is white and white is black, and I'm feeling a little off balance that I've never felt like that before.
Did you do anything? Did you go anywhere at that time? Well, first of all, did you do anything to yourself physically at any period of time in 1983?
Well, the October 1st deadline came and went, and he wouldn't get rid of Linda Coquina, and he was still denying that there was anything going on, and still telling me I was absolutely insane and crazy, and how unhappy he was, and how awful I was and stuff, and he was inadvertently becoming quite cruel. You know, he didn't throw things and everything, but he just wasn't coming home, and he was sneaking out at night, and he was being really weird, and I wasn't liking it, and I was very hurt by it. And then it came kind of to a head on my birthday that he didn't come home or anything, and he was just being a shit. And I covered up like I always did, and the kids and I had dinner and a party, and I put the kids to bed, and then I slit my wrists.
Did Dan come home that evening?
I guess so. Real late. I don't know, to tell you the truth.
Yeah. Well, at some point in time, did Dan come home?
The next morning
Yeah.
is when I saw Dan.
And what did he do at that time?
He was trying to wake me up.
Yeah.
He was waking me up.
Did you talk about how you were feeling?
I wasn't in our bedroom. I was in a different bedroom of the house. So if he came home and went in our bedroom, that I don't know if he knew what happened to me until the next morning when he came looking for me.
Okay. When he found you and you were, what did you talk about?
But he was just making me feel bad. He was just being a creep. And he said, you know, that he was sorry. There was nothing going on with Linda, and I should go get some help, that I'm having a mental breakdown, and that I need help because I'm imagining all these things.
Did you go to a counselor?
I went the next day, yes. For the first time in my life, I was all shaky and everything, and I really needed help. I went the next day.
Did Dan go with you?
No.
Dr. Breckenridge, I'm a nervous wreck. Just trying to talk about it has me shaking all over. I'm not coping very well. I know by intuition and by all these obvious clues that Dan is having an affair with this girl, but he keeps denying it. Until now, I've never doubted anything Dan ever told me. If he told me we were rich, I believed it. If he told me he had depositions in Oregon, I never questioned him. I never called hotels to check up on him. I believed everything he ever told me. But now he's telling me black is green, and I don't know what to believe. Dan says I'm going crazy. I'm having a breakdown. All these people keep calling me and telling me they see him with Linda. He keeps saying I'm crazy. Betty, I don't think you're crazy. Get a lawyer. You have to get a lawyer to protect yourself. But I don't want a lawyer. I don't want a divorce. I want Dan. I want him to get over the girlfriend, get over the midlife crisis, and come back to us. After this, Betty stopped therapy. When Dan came home that night, she greeted him with a drink. Honey, do you want more children? The pregnancies are tough on me, but heck, if you want me to have more babies, let's do it. The doctor told me the tubal ligation can probably be reversed. God, you really are crazy. I don't want more kids. Shit, I don't even want the ones we got.
Yes, I had had my tubes tied with with the birth of Rhett in 1979 because I had to do that if I wanted to get my leg operated on. After you have the vascular surgery in your leg, you're not really supposed to get pregnant ever again. But I had my tubes tied, and so I thought if it would make Dan feel younger, that he had young children or had babies, that I would get that operation reversed and have more children. Because I was asking, like what does she have that we don't have together? I mean, why would you be interested in Linda Kokina? I don't understand.
The next day, it started all over. More phone calls from friends who were seeing Dan and Linda at lunch together at the best restaurants in town. Betty called her friend Vicky and told her her troubles. Start going down there. Put on your makeup and your good dresses. Let her know you exist. Just say, "Hi, I'm Betty. I'm Dan's wife. I'm alive. It's me." It was Dan's birthday. Betty decided to try out Vicky's advice by paying him a surprise visit at the office. She brought a silver ice bucket, the best bottle of Brut she could find, and 2 glasses. She figured Linda would be in the same cubicle that a typist used to have, but she quit when Linda was hired. "Hi, I'm Betty, Dan Broderick's wife," Betty said to the receptionist. "They went out to lunch at 11. They're not back yet." "Who?" "Just them, Dan and Linda." "Thank you. I'll just wait in his office." Betty noticed Linda Kokina's name in big brass letters on the door of the office, right next to Dan's. Inside, it was spacious with expensive furniture and a new stereo system. Behind the desk, there was a large framed picture of Dan, taken in 1967. He was riding a white horse that was bucking. Moving to Dan's office, she found streamers and balloons taped to his desk. An open bottle of champagne and a chocolate mousse cake had been left unfinished. Betty walked back to the receptionist. "Who was at the party?" "No one. Just them." "Thank you." She walked back to Dan's office, closed the door, and sat at his desk. The sun went down, and Dan never came back. She picked up the phone and called her friend Vicky. "It's worse than I thought." "What are you going to do?" "I have absolutely no idea." She walked into the house and went to the bedroom and started pulling out Dan's clothes. "I know what I'll do. I'll kick the son of a bitch out." She threw armloads of clothes over the balcony. After she emptied the closet, she started on the drawers of underwear, socks, and pajamas. She took the can of gasoline for the lawnmower and poured it on the pile. She lit a match and threw it. After the fire died down, she took a can of black paint and poured it on top of the ashes.
Was there a time that you recall when your mother burned your father's clothes?
Yes.
Can you describe how she went about doing that?
The room overlooks the backyard, and she went in and took all the clothes and threw them out the back over the balcony into the grass. And then she dumped the drawers out, and then she went down and put gasoline all over the place and lit it on fire. And then she poured black paint all over the rest of it. Maybe she poured the black paint on to put this fire out. But after the fire, then there was black paint all over everything else. It wasn't burned.
When she was doing this, when she was throwing the clothes off the balcony onto the ground, were you there?
Yes.
Okay. And what were you doing?
Asking her to stop doing that.
Okay. Were you upset at what she was doing?
Yes.
Were you crying?
Yes.
And what was her response to you when you were trying to get her to stop?
She sent me away and hit me and told me to go away. And then I went away. So I wasn't there after the fire started.
What, were you aware of the fact that the fire started?
Yeah, the whole neighborhood was at my house.
Do you recall what you did?
Left.
Left?
Yeah. Walked down the street and down the hill.
Were you upset at the time?
Yeah, very upset.
What about, do you know where your sister or your brothers were at the time?
They were across the street at the McKelson's house. Those were our next door neighbors.
Were you there when your father returned home?
Yes, that was back then.
Do you recall what his reaction was when he saw his clothes?
He sat Mom down and said, "Oh, it'll be all right." And then he went outside and picked up stuff that was left. It was really calm and normal. And I didn't expect him to react that way at all.
You expected that he'd be more angry?
I thought he'd be in a fit. I thought he'd just pick up and leave. And he didn't. They worked it out.
Okay.
Mom calmed down and everything was fine.
Dan came home after 8, wobbly-legged, blind, drunk, and happy. He found the front door locked and staggered around to the back. Betty met him at the door. "You once told me that all you needed was your red Corvette and your checkbook. Well, you have your Corvette. Here's your checkbook. I waited all afternoon at your office. I hope you had fun f***ing Linda. I'll be seeing you." Dan was in shock, sobered up, and began making excuses. "Jesus Christ, I don't believe you thought that. We went to lunch together, but then I went to a deposition. I don't even know where Linda went. She must have gone shopping. I swear there's nothing going on." He went to the rubble and brought out a few pieces that weren't ruined. Luckily, his favorite outfit, the top hat and red lining cape he wore to the Blackstone ball, was salvageable. He didn't get mad. "You've got to believe me. I'm not even attracted to that kid. I'm old enough to be her father. There are no other women. It's just you I love. I never even held her hand. I never had a fantasy about her." Then Dan started kissing her and stroking her hair. He pulled her tight against him. She began feeling confused, close to him again. He kissed her. Ever since they had been going together, he never chased women. He never seemed interested. "Maybe I am losing it," she thought. Later, Dan took the kids into another room and spoke softly to them. He reassured them there would be no divorce and they didn't have to decide whom they were going to live with. The kids didn't understand why Mommy was being so mean to Daddy. When they came out, they celebrated Dan's birthday. Dan and Betty went to bed like nothing happened. Dan called a truce. Nobody was supposed to mention Linda's name. She was his employee, she worked for him, and they went to lunch together. And that was it. Dan wasn't staying out overnight anymore. He and Betty were sleeping together 3 or 4 times a week. Betty and Dan had almost completely stopped going out together in public, and that added to her panic that it was about Linda. Her jaw was so tight she had trouble opening her mouth. She went to the dentist. "It's tension, a hell of a lot of tension. What's the problem?" "I think Dan's having an affair with his secretary." "You mean Linda?" "How did you know?" "He sent her to see me to have her teeth fixed. She's beautiful, but she's just a baby. Don't worry, you're terrific. And besides, you have all those nice kids. I'll talk to him." November was the Blackstone Ball put on by the San Diego Bar Association, the biggest social event in town. Betty bought a $10,000 Bob Mackie gown. She had been planning this for months. She walked downstairs to present herself. The children gave her compliments on how nice she looked. "I don't want to go. I don't love you anymore. Every time I get up, you knock me down." Betty ran into the bathroom and locked the door. Dan knocked on the door. "Okay, I'll go." "I want to die." "Not tonight. Everyone's expecting us." Dan donned his famous top hat and red lining cape, and they went to the ball.